share my research with you. Today I'm going to talk on different aspects, and but they are all focusing on how to integrate adaptation concerns, adaptation to climate change into spatial plannings. The first part I will talk about methodology developed for mainstreaming climate change adaptation into urban development and environmental management program in sub-Saharan cities. I'll talk about Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, and that was a project conducted with at Sapienza University in Rome and with RD University, co-funded by the European Union, and I had a review of the project, kind of assessment of what the results of the project were, and on the implementation of mainstreaming strategies in between 2018 and 19, while I was in UCD, because it was included as case study for an equitable city international project. And then I'll talk about how the role of water infrastructure in adaptation to climate change. So Dar es Salaam is one of the commercial hub of East Africa. It's quite a big and fast-growing city. So in 2013, from the census, the population was 4 million, and it should be about, it's estimated to be about 6 million now. So the growth rate is 4 to 5%. So this is how it looks like. So it's quite a sprawled cities with a quite recent central business district where there is quite a mix of rural-urban activities, and is an hybrid cities, as someone scholar saying, where urban and rural livelihoods are really integrated and connected in a positive, both in a positive and negative way. So the project on adaptation mainstreaming starts by building the foundation for mainstreaming adaptation. So what are the basic information and methodologies we need to build a mainstreaming methodology, a mainstreaming process to be implemented by local and national authorities? There are two main macro areas we were working to. One is focused on understanding vulnerability scenarios on land and water, and the other was focusing on understanding adaptation actions already ongoing and possible future adaptation options, and building a community, what we call societal adaptation objectives, so a vision for the futures, for adaptation and not only for adaptation. So from the analysis of land and land cover and urban expansion, using Landsat images, emerged that the city is growing, yes, very fast, but it's growing mainly in a dispersive and discontinuous way. So the two classifications for the urban classes were basically what is called continuous build-up and discontinuous build-up. So low density and I wouldn't say high density, I would say compact built-up areas. And it's clear that the discontinuous built-up is growing very fast, was growing very fast, and the continuous built-up was growing fast as well, and more close to the population growth, to the census trend, which this population growth is due both to demographic growth and to rural-urban migration. And here below you have the hectares, how they evolved in time. In terms of water, we built a network for monitoring borers. So a network of borers was monitored in terms of conducivity, to understand what was the water quality at the level of salinity in water, and what was the level of the watershed. And it emerged that the water demand at that point, so this was done only on the north side of the city, the water demand already exceeded the groundwater active recharge, which means that really that there was a problem of seawater intrusion already. So water coming, salty water coming from the ocean going to the watershed, and this seawater intrusion, if the watershed goes down and the pressure decreases, is likely to increase also to the increasing in ocean temperature, I guess. And here we are I'm taking with colleagues from RD University, on the CBT level. The adaptation, the analysis of autonomous adaptation, so what residents were already going to cope with those changes already ongoing, due both to environmental changes, to global climate, to global warming, and to urban expansion, to fast urban growth. So where an extensive survey was conducted to define adaptation profiles, and to on 5% of the population was conducted, about 6,000 houses at that time. And people were asked what changes they observed, what adaptation they were currently undertaking, and they were asked other issues on access to resources, resource management, and rural-urban interaction. And one of the adaptation strategies, for instance, diversifying the livelihoods, so moving from agriculture to opening street shops, or collecting plastic to sell then the plastic to other people. And the two profiles we found, we call them adaptation as resistance and adaptations as flexibility. It came out that people more relying on rural activities for their livelihoods, agriculture, livestock, people with a land title, highly dependent on natural resources, which means, for instance, for water, they were relying on rivers or water ponds, and which were observing changes since they were dependent on natural resources. They were observing decreasing in water availability and soil fertility, and with a lower income, they were oriented to resist, to introduce incremental changes, and to stay in their areas. People more dependent on urban activities, relying on urban services, with a frequent travel to the city centers, observing more changes in rain patterns rather than land and water, and with a higher income, they were willing to, they were more flexible, so they were willing to relocate, to change completely their economic activities, to undertake big changes compared to the other profile. And here we have the connection between, an example of the connection between the adaptation and, for instance, the main water sources. So in the north side of the city, where there is it's more urbanized, there are more infrastructure, there are more flexible adaptation strategies. In the south, it's the opposite, and there are more resistance adaptation strategies. After that, we wanted to see how people deal with problems related to climate change and to land and water. I will talk only about water here, and to build a shared visions of the future. So we decided to use a backcasting methodology rather than a forecasting, because of the lack of data and because of the high uncertainty and dynamism of this environment, which is changing very fast. It's changing direction, so it's not a forecasting methodology was not really effective to us. So the backcasting methodology is basically defining where is the current state, building these shared visions, identifying the obstacles and challenges to achieve these visions, and going backward to remove those obstacles. And how we find those challenges and the solutions to address those challenges. We conducted a community scenario workshop using the forum theater methodologies, which is coming from the theory of theater of oppressor from Augusto Boal. And the forum theater session where workshops where was built this path from the present situation to the future vision, was built the future visions and then all the steps backward to the current situation. And so the workshop as a result has a performance, a story, which was then performed in different neighborhoods. So this is a performance. How is, for example, one of it was about water, a person dreaming to have plenty of water, which then, so that's the vision, and then he wakes up and realizes that there is no water. So what to do to address this challenge? They decide to go to the local street leader and to ask for the infrastructure. But they find the first challenge. The first challenge is that the community, the street leader is called town leader, say that they have no resources to build the infrastructure. So we find the first economic challenge. At this point, there is a facilitator that intervenes stop the performance and involve the community, the audience, asking if they want to bring a solution to this challenge. And this goes on with for all the challenges. So another challenge is that finally the community collect the resources. So they build a small fund. They go to the local authority. They go to the community leader, but the community leader has kind of agreement with one of the residents. So there is a political and corruption problem in this case, and so they basically sabotage the project and go on. And this goes with other within the residents and with other technical and environmental challenges, because then, for instance, when they realize the pipeline, there is an extension of the roads that damage the pipeline, the water pipeline they built. And this is another challenge when the audience is called to bring a solution, and so on. All those inputs, they were used to build the mainstreaming methodology. The mainstreaming methodology was meant to change the plan already. Only one was a draft plan, or not adopted yet, the Dar es Salaam master plan. But the other plans, were already adopted. And what we did is selecting together with the local authorities plans and selecting 2 measures in each of the plans. Those measures, they were then assessed with several assessment criteria. The criteria were adaptation concerns, potential adaptation action, and greenhouse gas emission. What means? Means that each measure was assessed in a way that is the measure contributing, is the measure having a negative impact of an adaptation concerns, which means water resources, quality of water resources connected to the water problem we mentioned before, seawater intrusion and so on. Is the measures contributing to support or to undermine some potential adaptation actions which emerged from the adaptation profile we saw before? Of course, we selected the likely positive potential adaptation actions and non the what is called maladaptation, because of course some of the adaptation ongoing were also damaging the environment. And then is the measures contributing to increasing greenhouse gas emissions or contributing to carbon capture and storage? So when the measure has a negative impact on one of those things, then it emerges an adaptation need. And the adaptation need then leads to identifying amendment option to the measures. Those amendments, so we had really a long list of amendments options, which were scored scored with criteria like effectiveness, efficiency, feasibility, if there was enough knowledge to implement the amendment option, and equity and legitimacy, like gender issues or other social issues. And so once we got this scoring, and we also assessed the synergies between measures, amendment options, the amendment options which were connecting well, so which had synergies, they were also selected. So this set of amendment options was complemented by the list of relevant actors to implement the options, the threats and possible threats and opportunities, and the cost implications. And these recommendations then were produced, shared, and discussed with the local authorities, and ready to be used to change the plan, to integrate. And at this stage, the mainstreaming process is closed. So the follow-up on between 18 and 19, since this was selected as a case study for an Equitable City International project from the Lincoln Institute. The follow-up with the Agricultural Office from Temeke is one of the municipalities in Dar es Salaam, highlighted that they are still implementing measures defined during the mainstreaming process. For instance, here what we see is the charcoal making activities in a mangrove forest. So you see that on the bottom right, decatted mangrove, sorry. And this is generating a problem because it's increased seawater intrusion, because damaged fishing activities, because there is no fish reproduction, a lot of negative impact. And sorry, so the measures introduced, which are ongoing and they are introduced, were the action basically. They were activities to preserving mangroves, like providing alternatives activities to charcoal making, like beekeeping or other activities, building community groups for monitoring excessive boreal drilling and other awareness raising activities. So I would say that the mainstreaming into plans, it moves towards mainstreaming into practice, because the mainstreaming is now in the everyday activity of the officer. So I'm not sure if that complex process on the plans is really used yet. The last part is on water infrastructure, and is a research conducted after this process, where the aim was to understand how the realization of water infrastructure is changing the situation, and the flexibility and diversification in accessing water, because they were identified as two key aspects for supporting adaptations. And I will start with one of the results, which basically shows that who has a better service of water, so who has direct access to direct connection to water, so has a pipeline as a coming to the house, pays less compared to who needs to go to the public water point to get the water. And so the public water point, at the public water point, the price of water, it was more than €2 per cubic meter. In the household connection, so you have the water inside your house, the cost was less than 50 cents per cubic meter, which is a kind of paradox. So the investigation was on how the introduction of new infrastructure changes the sources of water. Was conducted in two neighborhoods, North Dar es Salaam, Boko, Chama, and Kibamba, one coastal and one inner area. So I was saying it was investigated how the water source changes, how the water consumption changes, how the cost changes, how the water quality changes before and after, and how people are changing their way of coping with water stresses, and how the water management, who is responsible for collecting money or to managing the infrastructure, how it changes. So I'm not going through the different sections, but basically a table was built with all this, with all the changes. So what was the situation before, and what was after, how the actors configuration changes before, around water, of course, before and after, and how was the system structured. Just to give you an example, this is Kibamba, and the situation before was that there was only one house connected to the main transmission line. There was a pond and a river. Those were the only sources. And with the introduction of new infrastructure, 3 pipelines were built, 3 water tanks, and about 40 public water points, and also some household connection. The other case, there were quite no options to access water. There was a mosque and a private borehole, about 4 hours walking, with very poor quality of water. So 2 public water points were built, one only for the trucks managed by the utility company, and 1 pipeline and household connection. So the change observed, I'll just say some I will just mention the key difference between the 2 cases. The key difference is that in Kibamba, the infrastructure was managed by the water consumer associations, while in Boko Chama it was managed by the utility company. And this led to an higher cost because the cost of the water consumers association was added to the cost of the utility companies in Kibamba. But on the other side, in Kibamba there was more flexibility, and the residents were more connected to the infrastructure and resources. They were aware of changes, and so they were interacting more with the water consumer associations and with the local authority as well. And this led also to conflicts on the other side, because the water consumer associations was competing with the local leaders, which were aiming to orient the household connection. And the other problem was that there was the household connection were a bit mismanagement, and they led to the structure to collapse. So the water was really going down and down, and in a way that after a while the supply increased, but the demand increased much more than the supply. So if the gap before the infrastructure, the gap between supply and demand before the infrastructure was about 1,400 cubic meter a month, after was about 6,000. In Boko Chama, the situation was, the water was more, the water distribution was more reliable, but there were conflicts between residents and utility company, because the management was quite rigid. There was no flexibility in the payment. So residents were damaging meters because they were not understanding very well how it was working. And so they were completely disconnected from the infrastructure and the water source. So those are the difference between the 2 systems. So I will just stop on it because then we reflected on what are the flexibility and diversification implication of it. But one of the main problems, I think, is that, I mean, at city level, is that those different post-settlement distribution were coordinated. So they were occurring randomly according to the resources available, and they were easily working only for a while and not really addressing the issues. So I will stop here. Thank you very much.